Va bene ragazzi, allora, io direi che è arrivato il momento e come vi avevo promesso, ora arriva la seconda parte di un video che abbiamo già visto, ovvero tutte le fazioni di Warhammer 40.000 di BRICKY, che è un content creator che adoro, e qui ci divertiamo perché ci sono tutte le altre fazioni dopo che nella prima parte abbiamo visto tutte quante le fazioni dell'Imperium, d'accordo? E qui alcuni avranno, diciamo, una visione più d'insieme. Per chi non conosce il mondo di Warhammer 40.000 è una bella infarinatura generale, e per chi già lo conosce abbiamo modo di, diciamo, di scambiarci delle preferenze, diciamo così? Ok, quindi ragazzi, come sempre, ci cuffiamo, spegniamo l'audio di sottofondo e eccoci qua. Ops, scusate. Pac. Devo davvero trovare un modo di gestire meglio sta cosa. Va bene. Pronti ragazzi? Ogni fazione di Warhammer 40.000 spiegate, parte 2, ovvero tutto il resto a parte l'Imperium. Vai.
Hey all, this is part 2 in a two-part series on the Warhammer races. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, we do the Imperium of Man. You can check that out in the description, and I would highly recommend you watch that to get context for this episode. If you already have, go ahead and keep on watching. So after an entire episode of nothing but humans, we can now talk about Chaos, which involves humans again, but a little bit less. We also got demons and shit.
I just felt someone grab my ass.
What?
Like hard, Nick.
So, as I've mentioned many times before, we've discussed the warp, the immaterium, the hellish landscape, the purgatory.
Oggi parliamo solo di eresia,
realm
esatto.
Between the material realm of our existence. Now, in the warp, it's terrifying, horrible.
Non ho una
fazione
fazione preferita di Warhammer 40.000. Di fantasy sì, uomini lucertola.
Both formless and empty. It is vast and tiny.
La reaction a questo video che ho già fatto è la parte 1, questa è la parte 2.
While simultaneously does absolutely nothing of the sort. It is a hodgepodge and a culmination of just unknowable, eldritch, horrifying shit. And there are 4 gods that permeate in Chaos and the Warp. These are the 4 major Chaos gods.
Del Caos.
If we wish to learn about Chaos, we need to learn about each and every single one of these Chaos gods. First up, we have Khorne, and he is the easiest. Khorne is your classic Satan. He is all about anger, murder, fighting, blood, guts, death. You ever heard the term blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne?
Il motto di Khorne,
The whole idea is that he is all about the fury and strength of battle. He doesn't care where blood comes from, so long as blood is flowing. He wants to fight and murder and carnage and slaughter and death, 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 death. That is Khorne. Very simple to understand. Next up,
Khorne lo traduce come mais.
Tzeentch is the god of change. However, the god of change is
Tzeentch, il dio del cambiamento.
He's the most eldritch of all the demon gods. He has this weird way to always be plucking at the strings of the universe. He's always conniving and scheming and doing his best to cause as much little bullshit as he can. Tzeentch is unknowable. Everything that makes sense, he will and won't do. Every future and setting and every type of destiny or fate is all foretold and also changeable. It is set in stone while also completely random. He knows what everything is going to happen and also that none of it's going to happen. You would ask Tzeentch a question. That question leads to 3 more questions. And those questions lead to the heat death of the universe, which asks 4 answers to those questions. And then he thinks to himself, what are questions even really? And are you even asking the questions? Or are you simply giving paths to answers and other horse shit? Tzeentch is just, I'm gonna fuck with stuff. He is yes and he is no. He is the understanding and he is complexity. He is
il delirio.
And that's what the god of change is about. Very bizarre. And he likes birds a lot. I don't know why. Next up we got Papa Nurgle. Papa Nurgle, he loves you for who you are.
Il dio della pestilenza, della decadenza e della morte.
Is about rot, pestilence,
Flavio.
death, and decay. He is the end of everything. Him and Tzeentch do not like each other very much because where Tzeentch represents change and adjustment, Nurgle represents stagnation and death. He is all about miasma and pestilence and large bloat and pus and organs and people just being sedentary, sloth. He is the idea that everything will rot
I sottotitoli vanno un po' a cazzo, ragazzi, purtroppo non ci possiamo fare niente.
Besides decay and death. All of us will end up the same way, and broken down through just sheer never-ending decomposition. So the joke that Nurgle always loves you is generally because of that, because we all end up the same. We all rot, and we all die and wither. That's Nurgle, and he's got a general theme of course, pestilence and different kinds of diseases and sickness and things of that nature. That's generally Nurgle. He's pretty easy to understand as well, and he chunk! Finally, we have the youngest of the Chaos Gods, and that is Slaanesh.
Il dio del caos più giovane, Slaanesh.
Pleasure, or the god of unspeakable excess.
Il dio dell'eccesso e del piacere.
Referred to with sex. But it's not only sex, it's just that's a good avenue if you want to make stuff. Slaanesh is just the idea of the senses of the body being cranked to not just 11, but more like 17. See, we'll discuss Slaanesh a little bit more when we talk about the Eldar, because they done fucked up. But it, or whatever, is mainly about just the excess of emotions. And therefore, sex is generally a large part of it. However, it's mostly pain and torture. Lots of pain, torture, but sometimes sexually related or drug related. Lots of drugs. Lots of drugs. Slaanesh gets off on everything. Extremes in happiness, extremes in sadness, extremes in pain and sadism and masochism. And of course that goes along with the sex part of it as well. It's generally referred to with sex because of the color scheme, very purple, lots of exposed genitalia. A lot of their models have like exposed nipples and stuff. And that is generally the theme you go for from a physical side, but it really embodies everything. Mainly pain and also the excessive amounts of emotion. So when it comes down to it, you'll find a lot of them have things like spikes or whips or any kind of BDSM style gear because it is unspeakable excess, the prince of pleasure, everything in excess to the point where it is just sheer frightening. That is Slaanesh in a nutshell. A little bit bizarre and a little hard to describe sometimes, but as we talk more about the Dark Eldar later in this video, you'll understand it far, far better and far more than you'd want to. Now you might be thinking, why would anyone ever want to join Chaos? They all look horrifying, screwed up, and just frightening things, right? Well, the thing is that, of course, one, your mind is put into the warp and the immaterium, so you can be easily swayed by chaos demons when they get into your head, especially if you're a psyker. Sometimes regiments of the less mentally strong people, whether they be civilians or, say, low-level guardsmen or conscripts, can be easily swayed by this and become chaos cultists and stuff, and they serve their dark gods and whatever god they personally refer. However, and this might seem strange, chaos in their own right isn't necessarily evil. See, the warp is every manifestation of emotion and being, every soul, everything of existence. This includes all the
E questa è una cosa difficile da capire del caos.
Non è
necessariamente malvagio e basta.
Slaughter, but he's also got this weird sense of survival of the fittest, trial by combat, and honor. Khorne will never lie to you. Khorne will never stab you in the back. Khorne isn't about conniving and scheming. Khorne is about straight up mano, you versus me, get in the ring, we're gonna murder each other hard right now. It may not be a good thing at the end of the day, but it is that other side of the coin. Him and Tzeentch generally don't get along because Tzeentch is that conniving schemer, but he's also about the idea of hope. Where there is change for your predicament. There is change for your problem. The hope of the galaxy, the ability to bend the world to your will, the idea that your fate is not set in stone, but in reality that you control your own destiny and can control it whenever you want, the changer of ways. That is Tzeentch. And of course, Tzeentch and Nurgle hate each other because while Nurgle does represent stagnation, death, and decay, he also represents finality. An ending. The fact that you can be mentally at peace knowing that you will end and how you will end. Fear of the unknown, fear of change is not present with Nurgle. With Nurgle, everything will rot and die, and that provides that finality, that ability that this is over. We are all the same.
Va bene che questo video lo spieghi questo perché molti non sanno il background.
To live and die and rot. And with that, it brings peace of mind. Slaanesh is a lot more simple. While they are the excess of emotion, they are also the representation of emotion. Slaanesh embodies happiness. Slaanesh embodies excitement and joy and pleasure, not only in the sense of the physical, you know, bam style of pleasure, but also everything else like food and drink and air on your cheek and sunlight, the feeling, emotion and feeling. All of that is also represented with Slaanesh. So you have to ask, why are they always represented as super evil skulls and spikes on everything and want to murder everybody? I don't really got an answer for you on that one. My assumption is that because mentally humans may think worse thoughts, even if we don't act on them, and therefore they're projected in the warp more. That one's a little bit weird. I don't know. This is
vengono rappresentati right così probabilmente per quello che fanno i seguaci del Caos.
You already got the Imperium man. You need somebody to be a little bit worse than them. So you got demons. Honestly, who cares? I just want to buy like a bird magician. Look at him. So cool.
Molti modelli del Caos sono bellissimi.
Tabletop, Chaos demons are generally very melee based. They run in, go really hard. You have lots of summoning and conjuring, tons of spells. Generally a little bit frail, but they have special saves to make them a little bit stronger. You've got giant demons and smaller demons. You got hordes of little boys and tons of big guys.
Che bello quello.
As they seem. Demons. Nurgle is slow, Khorne is super scary in melee. You've got
Io ho sempre voluto dipingere il divoratore di Khorne, prima o poi lo farò. E anche un esercito di demoni di Slaanesh, questo prima o poi anche questo lo farò.
So overall,
che è veramente
the
interessante.
are a huge part of 40K and a massive threat to almost every single faction with the exception of a couple. However, the big part about demons is also transferred into the other 9 Primarchs we didn't talk about, which are the Chaos Space Marines.
Ecco, questa era la parte demoniaca, ora ci sono i Marine del Caos.
And all of his boys, all of them in the Primarchs, they have all also become Chaos boys, and they all have their own special Chaos legions, specializing in so many different things, just like the Adeptus Astartes, the Angels of Death, the regular Space Marines. Chaos Space Marines aren't a whole lot different than the regular Space Marines. They have the same armor, generally the same training and toughness. They just specialize in different kinds of things. And also a lot of the Primarchs have ascended into greater demons?
Madonna mia, i primarchi del Caos hanno alcune delle miniature più incredibili di tutte.
That are pretty awesome, if I'm going to be honest. They look really, really cool.
Oh, Angron adesso c'è, vero? Io avevo un piccolo esercito di Marine del Caos di Khorne.
Strength and firepower of a legion of Space Marines. Imagine that entire legion just converting to chaos and immediately fighting you. It's generally pretty horrifying. There's a lot of them, so I gotta write them down. But you've got the Emperor's Children with Primarch Fulgrim, loyal to Slaanesh. These people, they are some messed up people. They're just sensory overload, tons of drugs, tons of torture. And I think Fulgrim is a demon Primarch right now, and oh god, I am terrified to see what that man looks like, at least on the tabletop, because Emperor's Children are not good people. You've got the Iron Warriors, which are kind of like opposite of the Imperial
Grazie mille del follow, benvenuto.
Perturabo, I believe is his name. They're Chaos Undivided. They just kind of serve Chaos in a general aspect instead of choosing one of the 4. But the Iron Warriors are big on
gli Iron Warriors sono pure fighissimi.
And they're basically entirely against the Imperial Fist and a major rival. Perturabo, I believe, is also still alive, and I'm also very interested to see what he looks like, because
Chihuahua.
Primarchs are badass. You've got the Night Lords with Primarch Conrad Kurz.
Questi non sono mai piaciuti invece.
Dead, which is good because he's a sick fuck. But the Night Lords are generally about terror, terrorizing people, and terrorism. They're generally about fear and
Angron in 2 versioni c'è, appena sceso il 30.000, rilasciato a poco a Forgeworld, e nel 40.000 è stato uno dei primi demoni primarchi rilasciati in plastica, è bellissimo. Oh, devo andare a vederlo. Oppure mi sa che l'ho visto, però non mi ricordo bene. Sì, così tanto hanno tradito l'imperatore, letteralmente metà. Già. Ciao Nambi.
Oh, questo
questa è una cosa che mi potete dire voi. Mi ricordo che anche all'epoca delle varie fazioni del Caos c'erano alcune che avevano il loro fottutissimo codex dedicato, da quanto gli hanno dato importanza, e altre invece no. È ancora così? Madonna, sto modello che è incredibile. Non mi piace tanto il colore in sé come la però il modello è bellissimo.
And look at him. Look at him. It's so cool looking. Of course,
no, ma sono gestiti da un unico manuale, ma ci sono alcuni che avevano il codex a parte. Questi sono carini pure.
At least I blame them for it. They're little assholes. You got the Black Legion with Primarch Horus. Get fucked, nerd. You've got the Alpha Legion with Primarch Alfarius Omegon.
La Black Legion e gli Alpha cosi.
And then finally you've got the Thousand Sons.
Questi carucci, Thousand Sons.
Thousand Sons also have their own book, just like the Death Guard. Magnus is also a tabletop model. He looks super cool, as you can tell. And
ora li stanno facendo dedicati. Ok. Unici che mancavano con la relativa Fulgrim, ma l'hanno ricevuto giusto questa settimana. Oh, figo!
You can play as a lot of different ones, but the main ones that you can really work at are standard Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, as well as the Death Guard and Thousand Sons, as they are the most fleshed out, especially on the tabletop at least. See this right here? This is a really good way to describe the Chaos Space Marines. What the thick-headed fools with their broken corpse of an emperor fail to understand is that not only can they never defeat us, but they cannot hide or flee or shield themselves from the triumph of chaos. They are finite and we are unbound, undivided. They must not err, or they shall fall to heresy. All who fall join our cause. Every imperial fool who dares to open his eyes is a willing recruit. They strive merely to hold back our fury and might, and it consumes them. Thus, you can see chaos is inevitable. We lurk not only beyond their grasp and at their gates, we lurk within the darkness of their souls, on the tip of their tongues, in their tortured dreams. We are them, but freed from the shackles of ignorance. We are them, grown strong, evolved. We are them, but so much more.
D'altro nella lore in questo momento non siamo a un punto in cui sta quasi per succedere una roba del genere? O mi sbaglio io?
You could probably get rid of Space Marines, a decent amount, the Chaos Space Marines that is, but every soul that dies goes to the warp. Every Chaos soul will end up back in the warp. And depending on how hard you killed them, they will come back at some point. Every demon you banish will return at some point. Chaos is unstoppable. The warp is unending. And while maybe there is at some point some way to stop them somehow, the resources to do so, the requirements to do so, are so far beyond the reaches of man and the other races at the current moment that really it's just an unstoppable force.
Per la decima attuale generazione, attuale edizione, c'è Black Legion, Slaanesh, Divoratori e Nurgle in arrivo a breve. Ok. Ci manca Khorne allora. No, aspetta, Divoratori, Nurgle, Slaanesh. Ah, mancano i Thousand Sons. Oh, gli Eldar, il mio primo esercito è quello che ho avuto più, cioè il mio esercito più grande.
Also known as the Eldari, which are a super hyper specialized and very technologically advanced race of, well, elf people. They were as well responsible for the creation of Slaanesh, the newest demon god. How'd they do that? Debauchery on a world-ending scale. See, back in the day, it was just Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle.
Thousand sono in rilascio a breve. Ah, ok. Nella lore attuale Cadia è caduta, ma resiste ancora, quindi sta partendo una nuova crociata. Ok. Non so che cosa è successo con gli Eldar rispetto a quello che mi ricordo io.
They became so self-reliant and everything became so easy. There was no requirement.
Sì, le sorelle hanno un loro codex, sì, assolutamente.
Shortages. Everything was basically done. Everyone was so comfortable. And that comfort breeded this weird sedation. And that sedation breeded the requirement for more and more debauchery.
Debauchery!
Debauchery!
When everything you have can be so easily acquired,
Gli Eldar Oscuri
you will
hanno
end
alcuni
up down
modelli
this
veramente
road
belli,
of
ma
pure debauchery. All of the senses the Eldar
tanti anni
had
fa
that were so powerful,
provai a
things
giocarli
like
con l'esercito
feeling,
di un mio
happiness,
amico, penso che non lo
sadness,
farò
and
mai
just
più perché
evil
sono
and
fatti
good.
di
All
cristallo,
need to be
santi Dio.
satisfied and satiated. And the desire to satiate these senses grew more and more with worse and worse debauchery. It started off with things like sex and drugs becoming so much more rampant because these are the first things you generally turn to when requirements for living are so easily accessible. It would get to the point that made Sander Cohen in BioShock look sane. All right, this is the kind
I tiranidi
of debauchery
mi
it led
piacciono
to.
un po',
It was constantly
diciamo.
satisfying and satiating these sexual and sadistic or masochistic fantasies that only elevated and elevated, and this was species-wide. People started going down darker, more depraved, and more violent paths as time went on. However, some people didn't entirely take to that. Some of the Eldar were looking at this depraved species that they had become and said,
Esatto,
no,
te vedo
thanks to
fare...
me,
No, quello
dog,
non lo
I'm
so.
good. And they bailed. These are the Craft World Eldar. They left on these giant continent-sized starships called Craft Worlds. They believed in learning the old ways of the Eldar and pushing away from this depravity and debauchery and going back to their main roots. And so they would segment themselves on these giant craft worlds far in the outer reaches of space. They even had this thing called the Webway. Remember what we mentioned about warp travel with the Imperium? Well, the Eldar had something way safer called a Webway. And the Eldar Webway is actually like a pocket dimension kind of thing. And in that pocket dimension, there were also more horrible, depraved groups and clans that would spend their time in there. And if you imagine the debauchery was bad already, these were debauchery X10. So all of this continued, and it bloated until Slaanesh just burst forth. All that emotion, all that mental...
Gli Eldar hanno creato Slaanesh. Sì.
All of
Valdox,
this in
grazie
such a
mille a Subcom
condensed
Prime.
space. Don't forget, this is all being shot, all their souls as well, into the warp. All this depravity.
Basta ricordarmi gli uomini lucertola, che poi mi viene voglia.
Slaanesh was birthed and killed off 90% of the entire Eldar population. Untold trillions had their souls ripped from their bodies and their actual fleshy bodies devoured by Slaanesh demons. The entirety of the Eldar race was eaten alive and their souls consumed to the Prince of Pleasure. All of them got fucked up. It was so bad that it literally ripped a warp hole into the fabric of the materium called the Eye of Terror. That's literally this like quasi horrifying gateway portal
Tarcinius, grazie mille a Subcom
the
Prime.
materium and the immaterium.
Oh, grande, ragazzi.
Right next to Cadia.
Se un altro si abbona c'è l'Hype Train.
And it is horrifying.
Grazie di cuore.
So this Slaanesh, also known as She Who Thirsts by the Eldar, slaughtered the entire population except for a couple. Those in the craft worlds were actually not affected by this as they were so far in the reaches of the galaxy. That crazy crack, that Bertha Slaanesh only affected the
Bertha Slaanesh.
So these craft world Eldar were able to escape, but Slaanesh got their sights on them. Every time an Eldar will die, their soul doesn't just pass into the warp naturally. It goes straight to Slaanesh, craft world or not. What about those people in the Webway? Well, imagine that giant birth happening, but they were only able to just barely get a grasp onto you. Slaanesh was just barely able to hold on. These people are the Dark Eldar, or also known as the Drukhari. The Eldar population right now is so massively small. It is minuscule compared to any of the other most of the other populations in the universe. The Eldar are consistently having issues trying to get their population up because as their souls are constantly being hungered by from Slaanesh, they realize their entire species is doomed. and they understand it very well. Since the time of the fall, our race has been haunted by what we, in our reckless pursuit of hedonistic indulgence, gave birth to. Though our dreams once overturned worlds and quenched suns, we are now but fitful shadows clinging to the edge of existence. All the stars in the sky cannot blot out the hateful glare of the red moon's eye. The birthing place of the great enemy pulses with all the malice of a demon that is dreaming, casting its shadow over all we have ever done and all we ever shall. Every twisted strand of fate and casting of the runes leads me to this time, to this place, and it is clear that the final battle awaits me at the ancient crone worlds, a conflict the likes of which has not been seen since the Monkai warred amongst themselves and their corpse of a seer fell to his traitorous son. Is coming, and all my steps lead towards it, no matter that I walk other paths. I see the stars stained red with the blood of the Monkai, and though their wars do not concern me, I would gladly let them destroy one another. I know that to avoid this fight is to condemn my race to inevitable doom, and though all I see is darkness, I know that I will not flinch from my destiny. And now let's talk about cute plastic models.
Bro, I'm straight up not having a good time.
The first playable race we have
Gli Eldar sono ancora divisi in Eldar degli Arcamondi, poi Eldar Oscuri, vero? Più gli Harlequin che sono una cosa a parte.
Almost like a Space Marine Legion. Each craft world is in itself its own special kind of group. And the Eldar themselves are very fast and rely a lot on trickery. They are squishy, a bit weak, but they're very in tune as psychers. Tons of psychers across the entire Eldar population, and their weaponry and abilities are fast and extremely hard-hitting, but of course rather fragile. Understanding an Eldar's brain is an exercise in futility.
Ah, gli Eldar dei mondi selvaggi, vabbè, ma quelli ci sono, cioè ce ne sono stati sempre pochissimi, mi pare, di modelli.
Galactic scale. They fight weird, they think weirder, and Eldar in their own right really rely on this to keep their species alive. They need to think about deception and the strangeness of what they do if they truly want.
Tech Flavio, grazie mille della sabbia in regalo e grazie mille dell'hype train, ragazzi.
Entirely small population. However, I must say that it seems like their population is getting slightly better. These craft worlds hold millions upon millions of people. And as they continually, reproduce and have their craft worlds expand, losing a few people in battle, while hurts a lot, they aren't really losing what's extremely precious to them. It's not like every single death means the death of their species. It seems like they're kind of on the upturn a little bit. They're still a doomed race being sucked into Slaanesh every time someone dies, but they are definitely doing a little bit better than they were before. Eldar are fast, cunning, and what they don't make up for in tankiness, they make up for an extremely advanced.
Mi ricordo quando comprai il mio primo Prisma.
That is a
appena uscito, prima volta che uscì quel modello.
Warhammer world. Why is it called Monkai? Well, it's because you can't, in your game, call people monkeys. On the tabletop, exactly what I said.
Oh, vedete questo? Questo è probabilmente l'arcamondo che esattamente questa visuale qui vorrei per un ipotetico mio nuovo esercito di Eldar. Esattamente quello che vedete a schermo. Eh sì. Non mi dispiacerebbe affatto. Eh sì. Guardate che bello. Il Titano Eldar probabilmente è uno dei miei preferiti in assoluto. È bellissimo.
Very tanky, generally pretty squishy, hit like trucks and move at Mach 5. Fast, hit hard, die
un sacco
fast.
Giallo, sì.
Exactly how it sounds. They've been good for a very...
Però Yanden come arcamondo ha un sacco di right guards, cioè un sacco di unità comandate dalle pietre, cioè dagli spiriti delle cose. Da lore dovrebbe essere così. E sì, e dovrebbe essere quello, se non sbaglio, da lore. La differenza tra gli arcamondi Eldar, mi pare, Ultve è pieno di psionici, Seiman è pieno di jet bikes e di cose velocissime, e Yanden, quello giallo, è pieno di spiriti, cioè di macchine controllate dagli spiriti. E che minchia c'è rimasto? Bialtan era pieno di guerrieri d'aspetto, Cioè pochi guardiani standard e un sacco di guerrieri specializzati, se non sbaglio. Almeno era così, ma non so se è cambiato. Poi ci sono in realtà un sacco di altri arcamondi Eldar, questi sono quelli 4 principali, però c'è la lore anche per altri arcamondi, tra cui quello perduto, che è finito dentro l'occhio del terrore. Si è salvato solo Maugan Ra, che è il principe dei tetri mititori.
Very long time too. We bring only death and leave
Flavio,
only
grazie mille dei
carrion.
bits.
It is a
Impegnativo
message
seguire il
even
livello
a
novello in
human
merito.
can
Ah,
understand.
c'è tempo. Non c'è fretta.
Eldar. So, Drukhari. Let's talk about the dark.
Drew Carey.
Oh, today's episode of
Oh.
is fucked up.
Gli Eldar oscuri.
That's fucked up.
So those people I mentioned in the webway, in the super deranged cults and the depraved people of the Eldar, in the webway they didn't quite get a hold onto them. Slanesh like has them, but it has them on, like,
Hanno
by the
alcuni
pinky
modelli
finger.
veramente
And they're
bellissimi a
slowly
guardarli,
being consumed by
ma
Slanesh. But they found out they can stave her off by
c'è sempre
doing
una parte di me
Slanesh
che
things.
gli
The Dark
stanno proprio sul
Eldar
cazzo.
are by far the worst, most horrifying, disgusting, depraved, and brutal race in all of Warhammer 40K. These are entirely a group of people whose full purpose to save their species from extinction, to go into planets, raid them, and take as many slaves as they possibly can to torture them for 1, 5, 10, 20, a million years, because that torture will keep them from dying. They look very BDSM style too. They definitely have a lot more spiky bits and they have a lot more of
Modelli
that
belli
kind of
quanto
leathery
delicati.
black
Sì, è
look
vero.
to them. But let's say you are an
Mi
upstanding
ricordo,
imperial citizen.
mi ricordo il mio amico che li usava, gli Eldar oscuri, c'aveva ste valigette con la spugna, ma questa quantità enorme di cotone pressato tra i vari modelli che lui usava, che poi era un casino, lasciava ogni genere di residuo e poi che doveva essere tolto tutte le volte, eccetera, però era l'unico modo, lui dice, all'epoca eravamo ragazzini, quindi chi lo sa se è il migliore, probabilmente no, modo migliore, però sì, cioè, portarli in giro si rompevano in continuazione perché sono molto fragili, tutte ste punte che scappano fuori dai modelli che si spaccano molto facilmente.
Look to them. But let's say you are an upstanding imperial citizen living life on a regular planet. You get invaded by the Necrons. The Necrons will shoot you with a
i Necron, poi vi dico qualcosa
and you
dei
will be
Necron.
destroyed in a millisecond, and that's it. Not the worst way to go. You are invaded by Chaos Marines or something. You take a bolter shot to the head or a chain sword across your stomach and you get cut in half. Painful, but not the worst. The Orcs arrive. They beat you to death. Hurts, but, you know, whatever. Tyranids, they eat you alive. It's pretty rough. The Dark Eldar. This is going to get a little graphic. I apologize. You pray you die. You don't. You are instead taken as a human slave. Your life will be endless work and agony, 24/7. They will make sure you can't not die, as your pain satisfies them. They will hook you up to all manner of torture devices. They will inject pain-based like stimuli drugs directly into your nervous system. They will slowly run razor blades across your skin. They will fillet you and pull out your teeth and your fingernails one by one. They will remove your appendages and your skin and wait for it to grow back so they can do it again.
Ah sì, la GIOCHI ha fatto sicuramente un impero con sta cosa. E oltretutto si sta molto espandendo.
Your entire family in front of you and do the exact same thing to them. You yourself will
La GIOCHI sta probabilmente vivendo un suo secondo periodo d'oro ultimamente.
And this will occur for 20 years until you are no longer satisfying to them. And then you will be contorted, crushed, and twisted into some form of trophy. A fleshy trophy, or a ring, or a couch, or a TV stand, or perhaps a wonderful hat, while you are, of course, still alive and breathing. And you will become a moaning, fleshy trophy for eternity. And that is what happens when you are taken by the Dark Eldar. They are the most depraved, most horrifying race in all of 40K. They look the part, And they
Altra
do
parte
it
Warhammer,
so they all
certo,
don't die.
ci sono altri
They are
giochi.
literally forced to do this, because if they don't, Slaanesh grip will
vai
get
sul sito li
harder,
vedi.
and they will have their souls pulled away. So long as they keep doing this, Slaanesh is like, "You're doing good, man. You're doing solid. You keep that shit up, you elf-eared bastards." That's the Dark Eldar. That's the Drukhari. They are horrible. On the tabletop, they're actually kind of like Eldar, but more extreme. They are even squishier.
Guarda quanto
than the
belli
Eldar,
sono
but
alcuni
they hit
modelli.
generally even harder. Fast attacks, skirmishers, really quick, speedy, like get around them, do a lot of damage, get away kind of stuff. That's most of the Dark Eldar. Look up the definition of Grim Dark in a dictionary. You'll find a picture of the Dark Eldar. And Sev from Republic Commando. A quote from Mr. Vecht. "We are the lords of despair, masters of terror. Dread and agony are our meat and wine, and they are plentiful indeed." Dark Eldar.
Simpatici.
Let's talk about the Harlequins. Clowns.
Oh, questi. Veramente stranissimi, non mi hanno mai attirato più di tanto.
Harlequins are a bizarre
Oltretutto
race of Eldar.
dipingerli è un
They're
delirio.
demonic clown
Una volta
performers.
perché ne
They're
ho
like
comprato
a weird
uno, ho
mix
provato a
of Sander
dipingerlo,
Cohen
ho
from
fallito
Bioshock
miseramente.
and Jin from League of Legends, but in a more clown theme. They're artists of death and perfecters of their craft. They do not belong to Craft Worlds or any of the weird Drukhari people. They guard something called the Black Library, which is this giant tome of never-ending knowledge deep in the heart
La
of
lore
the Eldar
degli Harlequin è
Loveway, and also
affascinante,
guarded
ma
by their god named Kegorok, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He is the laughing god, but it's the Eldar's laughing god, and these are the Harlequins, the Harlequin clowns. These are Eldar clowns, okay? So imagine the things that an Eldar, these depraved individuals, would find funny. And this is the god of that. It's a horror clown. These are gods of horror for us normal people. For them, they're like, "Oh, it's so funny. They're all dying horribly. Honk, honk." They're very bizarre and difficult to describe. They've escaped the ruinous powers of Slaanesh somehow, but their main thing is guarding that Black Library. And the Harlequins just... they're demon clown performers. They're barely any models on the tabletop.
Sì, sono pochissimi. Guarda che delirio a dipingerli.
Demon clowns. I'm not sure. I got a quote. It is too easy.
Almeno non so se i modelli sono cambiati, ma una volta questi qua, cioè il motivo a scacchi non aveva una texture, cioè dovevi dipingerlo tu. Non ci sono mai riuscito. Non ce l'ho mai fatta. Proprio tutti i simboli, il motivo a scacchi o il motivo a rombi. Oh mio Dio. Veramente il delirio, sì.
I'm not sure. I got a quote. It is too easy for an Eldar to embrace the obscene virtues of chaos, for Slaanesh is nothing more than a manifestation of the Eldar mind in its most wild and unconstrained
Anche no,
form.
ora
Human
ha una
morality
texture.
is
Ok.
meaningless to the Eldar, and to the dark side of the
Anche
Eldar
ora
mind,
non ha una texture.
all life is to
Perfetto.
be expended
Bene.
at a whim. Cruelty
Non ce la farò
and
mai.
generosity are but the impulse of a moment. Beauty and sensuality are virtues that can be expressed in bloodshed just as easily as in song. To an unfettered Eldar mind, there is neither sanity nor madness, but merely a wave of perfect existence fulfilled by its own savage momentum. They're very strange. The Harlequins, Drukhari, Eldar, they are an anomaly that make humans seem completely easy to understand in comparison. They range from rekindling their civilization to horrifying murder and also clowns. They're all over the place, but honestly, they represent quite well and are rather interesting, especially with the whole Slaanesh murdering everyone bit. So, yeah, Eldar.
Io quella nuova, quel modello lì, cioè questo qua, io l'ho visto più volte, ma non ho idea minimamente di chi sia, che cosa faccia, da dove sia saltata fuori e di che fazione sia. Non so assolutamente niente. Mi dovrò mettere a pari.
The whole Slaanesh murdering everyone bit. So, yeah, Eldar. Now,
E adesso
bugs.
i tirannidi. Sì. Vabbè, il concetto di tirannidi è semplice. I Zerg sono unicamente alveare che mangia tutto.
Let's talk the Tyranids. They're bugs.
I Vrain, fazione Eldar nuova, fazione Eldar nuova Innari. Ok. Però ne so quanto prima. Vabbè. Zari, buonasera.
hence why they look so much like Eldar, Zerg.
Ecco, esatto,
Imperium of Man.
esatto, la sapete questa che StarCraft doveva essere in realtà un gioco ambientato nel mondo di Warhammer 40.000, o poi alla fine pensa che geni hanno deciso di non dargli la licenza e Blizzard ha tirato fuori delle cose che ci assomigliano un sacco e ha fatto una fortuna.
Like, kind of Space Marine-y.
Parlare di lei è spoiler sulla
That's
storia
a little bit
presente.
Space
Ah,
Marine-y
ok.
to me. Maybe, I don't know. You really fucked up on that one, Games Workshop, didn't ya? Tyranids
esatto,
are a
sì.
giant infestation of unfathomable proportions. These
Sì.
are
I
giant,
tiranidi sono di fatto un'infestazione.
hive
Sì.
mind organisms that are
Una
basically all
forma di vita patologica,
absorbing as much biomass as they possibly
parassitica
can
e
to
patologica.
evolve and mutate
Di fatto sì.
to be extremely
Stavo per
potent and
spoilerarti una cosa
powerful
Ah,
and
ok.
kill and eat anything
Ci sarà
in
una
their path.
Kerrigan
They
nell'esercito
are
dei tirani.
probably
Ti immagini? È una cosa che ogni tanto mi chiedono. Ti immagini viene fuori un terrestre, che già viene fuori una Kerrigan in mezzo ai tiranidi? Una che era umana e poi qualcosa? In realtà c'è una cosa bellissima che qua nel video la mostreranno, è una delle cose che prima o poi dovrò collezionare, che mi piace un sacco, che riguarda i tiranidi ma solo in parte.
the least evil faction in all of 40K.
Una grande cheat, ma non solo quello, sarebbe interessante proprio il risvolto. Sì, ci ma ho capito che cosa intendi, Denon, ma non era quello che intendevo io. Sì, esatto. Poi ne parla il video.
They have a thing called the shadow in the warp specifically, where when they are coming in to invade a planet, they have this weird ability to kind of cut off the warp on all the psychers on that planet. And how do you get help across the stars?
Che in genere è il segnale dell'arrivo dell'invasione tiranide. Quando improvvisamente tutti non riescono più ad avere accesso al warp perché è bloccata dai tiranidi e arrivano.
Comes out of orbit and just will massacre, absorbing all that biomass and turning them and all of their other Tyranids into even more advanced monsters. They come in so many varieties too, all based on what is important. Tiny little ripper swarms for scouting and having little dudes eat people up, to the Hormigons, Termagants, and Gene Stealers, all the way to the Hive Guard and the Exocrines and the Swarm Lord, to Hive Tyrants and their giant battle fleets.
Non aver colto il collegamento con la Kerrigan che no, è quella di StarCraft. Se vogliamo il personaggio principale della storia di StarCraft.
They're extremely good at anti-biological weaponry. There is no way you can plague them or blight them. They have extremely strong armor, carapaces and such. Tyranids are nigh perfect organisms and are pretty spooky when it comes down to how they handle all of their genetic material. Keep feeding them, they'll keep evolving. They keep on creating new horrifying organisms.
Ma hai giocato a StarCraft? Dovresti.
Across the galaxy. And you know what the most
bellissima lore, bellissime campagne. Le mie campagne preferite di tutti gli RTS di sempre.
Behemoth, Kronos, all these different kinds of hive fleets,
sì.
and they've all arrived.
Ogni diciamo flotta alveare dei tiranidi ha oltretutto un suo schema di colori, perché è come se fosse diciamo una genia, no? Ed è interessante come cosa, e arrivano da tutti gli angoli dell'universo conosciuto, e quindi il video ha detto giustamente, per quanto ne sappiamo potremmo essere in realtà completamente circondati, che tipo gli altri universi eccetera sono in realtà tutti pieni di tiranidi e stanno piano piano arrivando qui.
In the galaxy
ne sanno qualcosa gli Ultramarine.
Different sections of the Milky Way galaxy have had,
e anche gli Eldar ne sanno qualcosa.
And that is horrifying, because as far as we know, we could just be surrounded on all sides by Tyranids. The only reason you may not hear a whole lot about Tyranids is because it's a little bit hard to have a bunch of story off of one hive mind genocidal.
Sì, non ci sono tante storie, perché di fatto è un'unica mente alveare che vuole mangiare tutto quello che si trova davanti.
There are some cool characters, the Swarm Lord, Old One Eye. You can't really have a whole bunch of major character-based stories around them. As awesome as they are, they're simple. They want to eat you. They want to eat you and absorb your biomass. They are simple bugs. If you want something a little more complex, talk Gene Stealer cults.
Oh, eccoli qua.
I get around faster than walking, and wherever I need a seat,
I can just sit on my balls.
Gene stealer cults are a
Così.
special brand of tyrannid that can slowly infect themselves into different kinds of society.
Eccoli
And by
qua.
infecting them,
Questi sono gli umani filotirannidi, cioè sono i culti che venerano i tirannidi e sono praticamente una graduale infestazione e i gene stealer infettano piano piano un pianeta e alcuni umani cominciano a portare il gene tirannide e piano piano mutano, come li vedete qui, e venerano i tirannidi come dei. Sì, sono tipo ibridi, sì.
they can rise up to where they all pray and believe in these regular humans, pray and believe into their tyrannid hive mind gods. And these brood lords and I think they're called patriarchs all can turn an entire world all based into gene stealers. And these are called gene stealer cults. An entire hive world of the Imperium can be turned into nothing but servants to the tyrannid masters just by infecting them and screwing with their genetic code a little bit. They also have this cool like Mad Max look, which is really neat. They are definitely one
Sì,
of the
le
bigger
miniature
threats
mi
to the
piacciono un
Imperium
sacco.
besides Chaos. I keep saying biggest threat to
Servono
the
4
Imperium.
generazioni
They're
e poi
up there,
parte
though,
l'invasione.
because
Sì.
you, dingus, stepped on a bug in middle school. Asshole. There is a cancer eating at the Imperium. With each decade, it advances deeper, leaving drained, dead worlds in its wake. This horror, this abomination, has thought and
C'è una
purpose that
teoria secondo
functions on an
quali tirannidi stanno
unimaginable
fuggendo a un nemico
galactic scale.
sconosciuto.
And
Non ne ho
all we
idea
can
di
do
questo.
is to try to stop the swarms of bioengineered monsters it unleashes upon us by instinct. We have given the horror a name to salvage our fears. We call it the Tyrannid race. But if it is aware of us, it must know us as nothing but prey. Tyrannids, they're cool. But are they as cool as the orcs?
Orcs. Orcs, 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 orcs.
Orcs, 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 orcs,
Esatto.
orcs, orcs. I fucking love orcs. So, yes, the green monsters, the green tide, the green skins. These orcs, they are in fact a race in 40K.
Sì, che bella questa cosa degli orchi che da lore, se ho ben capito, se solo gli orchi non passassero il 98% del loro tempo a ammazzarsi l'uno con l'altro, se fossero veramente tutti quanti uniti, distruggerebbero e conquisterebbero tutto senza possibilità di scampo perché sono semplicemente troppi, più di qualunque altra cosa, più dei tirannidi, più del caos, più di qualunque cosa possibile immaginare, più degli umani sicuramente, eccetera, se solo non si ammazzassero costantemente l'un l'altro. No? Che bello. L'unico che c'è quasi riuscito è Gasgol Traka, se non sbaglio, però poi hanno fermato pure lui.
The orcs are as exactly what you expect them. They have archaic weapons, they're big boys, they have axes, and they have got big old teeth, and they want to kill everything, and there are so many of them. The only reason they haven't taken over the entire galaxy.
Gli orchi nascono dalle spore, se non sbaglio, tipo funghi.
Orcs are so cool. Orcs don't have philosophy. Orcs don't have existential crisis. What matters is who's the biggest orc. You listen to that guy because he the biggest orc. He big orc. Big orc knows best. You win through the power of imagination. Of all the races I have battled throughout the galaxy,
la stessa sensazione che mi diede quando lessi il Codex degli orchi. Sì, da loro dovrebbe essere così. Vale Fenice, buonasera.
For strategic gains and are just as likely to slaughter each other as the enemy. How does one battle an enemy that defies all logic? As an orc, you're enjoying
mi fanno
life.
troppo ridere.
You're enjoying the life you're given. Your whole life and job and purpose is to get up and beat each other to death because you can. The
Ciao, dottor
orc
Puccio,
is the man
parenti
who
ai miei
understands
hater.
everything.
No, i miei
He
hater
is
sono
the
più stupidi
boss.
degli orchi.
And orcs have this really weird, like, big, dumb, stereotype British accent.
Non mi trasmise il terrore a mancanza di speranza ai tirannidi. Ma infatti, no, hai ragione, perché si ammazzano costantemente l'uno con l'altro. I tirannidi no. Sono unicamente.
You got your boss over there, and you better listen to the boss, because if you don't listen to the boss will squish you and make you an example for the other orcs. And then you can't fight, because orc dead. And orc dead can't fight, because orc dead. Orcs. They scrap together machines out of parts that don't make any sense, and because they believe, they have the mental imagination that that machine will run, it'll run. If that machine's out of gas, you're driving that machine with your fellow orcs, and the biggest orc is behind the wheel, and you run out of gas, some orc behind you like, oh, Zog, we're out of gas. And the big orc is like, no, we're not. I filled the fucking gas tank up earlier. And all the other orcs are like, oh yeah, you did do that. And then you turn the fucking mech back on.
Dura ancora un po' il
again.
video, sì.
Does
Siamo,
it have gas?
vabbè, siamo a 2/3.
Probably not. But
No,
it
siamo a
works.
3/4, dai.
The power of imagination.
Sono ancora poche
They
fazioni.
paint things red because it makes them think that goes faster. They paint things purple because it's the sneakiest color. You want to know why? You ever seen a purple orc? Didn't fucking think so. Orcs are also like ancient.
Sì, dipingono i
as hell. They're
veicoli
back
di
in the
rosso perché credo che
Eldari
vadano più
time
veloce.
frame.
E
But back then they were
il
called
punto è che a volte
orcs, and they were
funziona.
much larger and
Anzi,
scarier
cioè,
and
nel
far
senso che a
more
volte funziona
intelligent.
sta roba.
Now they're just
Per qualche
orcs, and they're
ragione
big, dumb, and they
che
smack
nessuno è ancora
things,
riuscito a
but
capire.
They're pretty spooky.
E le loro macchine, quando da lore, credo che quando capita che gli imperiali guardino le macchine degli orchi e gli capita così, non hanno idea di come funzionino perché non dovrebbero funzionare, no? Però per qualche ragione funzionano. Sono queste cose che è bellissima come cosa.
They're not very well armored, but they hit really hard, and it's called the Green Tide because there are so many orcs. There are about as many orcs as there are Tyranids. Maybe more. Who knows? But they keep on, you know, murdering each other, so it's not too bad of an issue. Orcs are entirely comic relief. Their stuff is slapped together. That makes no sense. Their vehicles don't work the way they're supposed to, but they work because they think it works, because they imagine that it works. Orcs care only about who is the
Gli
biggest
imperiali
orc,
pregano
and they
per
will
premere il
follow the
pulsante di
biggest
accensione
orc.
proprio
And if they
sì.
wanna be the biggest orc,
So che
they'll
evidentemente
challenge the
funziona
biggest
pure
orc.
quello.
And then when they go and they issue a WA is just war in orc. They murder everybody and everything in this giant tide of green orcs who are just excited to be hitting something. They don't care that they're hitting Eldar or the Imperium or Tau or anyone in between. They're just so they get to beat shit up. That's orcs. And on the tabletop, they are a total coin flip, and they're really fun. I have never met a salty orc player. I have never met someone who plays orcs and
Funzionano perché gli orchi credo che funzionino. Oh, guardate questo che state vedendo adesso. Gli orchi non mi hanno mai attratto come esercito in generale, generico, eccetera, tranne una fazione, i Bad Moons, il clan che è basato tutto sulla tecnologia improbabile. Ho sempre voluto fare un esercito di Bad Moons, però non da corpo a corpo, cioè tutto basato sulle macchine, i camion assurdi, i camminatori, tutte unità che fanno fuoco con questi mitraglioni improbabili messi tutti quanti insieme, i nobs con tutti i cannoni montati uno sopra l'altro, tutto così. Questa è l'unica parte degli orchi che genuinamente mi piacerebbe collezionare. No, non ho un kink sul giallo, è che mi piace no, il mio punto è la lore, non è il giallo in sé. Il giallo neanche mi piace tanto proprio come schema di colore, preferirei di gran lunga il rosso. Però no, vabbè, insomma, perché mi piace la lore di Bad Moons e per gli Eldar mi piace la lore di Yanden. Ecco, i magli imperiali mi piacciono tantissimo come concetto, ma poi all'atto pratico non mi piacciono le miniature. Preferisco gli Iron Warriors allora a sto punto.
That guy. Orc players have this kind of fun to them because when you play them, you are completely submitting yourself to RNG. So here's the thing. Guardsmen, Imperial Guardsmen, when they shoot, they roll a dice, and on a 4 up, they'll hit their target. They have a 50% chance. Space Marines, pretty good. They hit on a 3 or higher because they're well trained. Adeptus Custodians, they hit on 2s because they're
Cristo
super
santo.
well Orcs, they hit on a 5 or higher. But if they roll a 6, they get to make another shot with anything, from the dinkiest pistol to the biggest rocket launcher. It doesn't matter. Half of their stuff will blow up on a whim. One
Devo farti conoscere i Lamenters.
medics, if you
Non so
roll
cosa siano.
one to heal someone, you fuck up your surgery and you just kill an orc. They're so wacky and silly. But the thing is if you roll well, you roll high, and you keep rolling high, you are going to crush people. And if you don't, you lose. I mean, that's what you get when you play orcs. That's what happens when you play orc. It's a coin flip. Which is why you can't be a salty bitch when you play orc.
Guarda il titano.
Things won't go your way. It's just the roll of the dice. You're playing a dice game. But if you're going to have fun and you want to be
Capitolo
stupid,
successore
and you wanna
Blood
be
Angels
silly,
molto peculiare.
you're
Ah,
gonna
aspetta, mi sa che ho visto qualcosa del genere, sì.
But on the opposite side of the fun part
Oh.
of this, let's talk about the Necrons.
Necrons. Allora, sui Necron vi devo dire una cosa.
The Necrons are spooky,
Intanto
scary
sentiamo.
skeletons and very grimdark again. They have a much more fleshed out lore than before. Back in the day, they were just undead Egyptian space terminators.
Io giocavo a Warhammer quando i Necron non c'erano ancora e mi ricordo chiaramente nella terza edizione, quando sono venuti fuori la prima volta, sono impazziti tutti. Tutti i miei amici, l'80% dei miei amici ha iniziato un esercito Necron quando sono saltati fuori, per una ragione, tutti che volevano comprare il monolite. All'epoca era una miniatura completamente fuori di testa per gli standard di allora, era troppo bella, gigante, epica, assoluta, veramente incredibile. Agli orchi non importa chi vince che perde, ci sia una bella scazzottata, praticamente sì.
And they still look that way, but now they actually have a story. So way back in the day, you had the Necron tier. Kind of see a theme here: Eldari, Eldar, Krork, Orc, Necron, Necron tier. So the Necron tier were this race of generally kind of shitty people. Not because they were personally shitty, but because their lives were awful. They were ill-fated to a horrible existence of like radiation and a terrible planet they lived on, and everything just really sucked. Being a Necron tier was just really depressing. They really were looking for immortality. They were extremely reliant on the hope that they would eventually find the key to living forever and just stave off this horrible nature.
No, Camry è relativamente recente, ragazzi. Da lore no, ma miniature sì.
They found this group. They're called the Old Ones. Imagine them kind of like the Forerunners in Halo or the Xel'Naga in StarCraft, right? These Old Ones were these strong, pretty much omnipotent beings, and they, of course, knew the key to immortality. So the Necrons went to them and said, please, show us your ways. And the Old Ones said, piss off. Not really, they were a lot more humble about it, but they did not want to share their secret of immortality with the Necrons. The Necrons, of course, took this very well and waged war with them, kind of under this united banner. The Necron different dynasties didn't really like each other, but under this one man, the Silent King, he thought the best way to unite his race was to do this giant war with the Old Ones out of spite for them keeping the secret of immortality to them. This was known as the War in Heaven, and this is actually like a multi-stage
L'abbiamo visto nel video della lore.
During this War in Heaven, they discovered the Star Gods, a whole new race of people known as the Catan, or the Catan. These Star Gods were also very much like Old Ones, almost omnipotent beings, and they too had the key to immortality. And so the Necrons went to them and said, hey, can you help us fight off?
Sì, Total War Warhammer, sì, li ho giocati tutti quanti.
These old ones,
però i Total War ormai mi stanno veramente annoiando.
In fact, we can help provide
in generale proprio come franchise.
So the Silent King of the Necrons,
sì, l'ho visto il Tesseract, la versione maggiorata del monolito rifatto, sì. Modello che è semplicemente un titano che avanza sul campo, sì, lo so. E l'ho sempre voluto comprare, maledizione.
And the Necrons were dragged in chains to this biotransference where their flesh was stripped from them, replaced with nothing but a metal hollow shell, as their souls were ripped from their body and fed to the Catan. And the Catan fattened up. They got chonk on the souls of the Necrons. As this was their plan all along, they consumed the flesh and souls of the Necron tier and turned them all into unwilling robotic slaves.
Anche il monolito ora è più grosso, l'hanno cambiato, ok.
And then, with their new-founded Necron army, they pointed their guns at the Old Ones, and the Catan continued their domination of the stars and their genocide, complete and full genocide of these Old Ones. The Old Ones did their best to stave it off. They even created other races, the Eldari and the Orcs, to try to fight off the horrifying Necron army and the Catan above them. But there was absolutely no possible chance for them. And the Old Ones were absolutely extinguished across the galaxy. Their entire race completely removed. Full-on 100% genocide. However, during all this, the Catan so just infatuated with their victory, started fighting each other for fun, for sport, and for small differences, doesn't matter. The Catan, with these overpowered people, they're going to eventually hit each other at some point. And as they began just menially fighting each other, the Eldari and the Orcs actually started pushing on the Catan's borders a little bit, giving them a little bit of a run for their money. And as this continued, this is when the Silent King, who retained his consciousness, decided to leap into action and start a full-scale revolt against their Catan masters. And this revolt was bloody, as the entire Necron army was surged off to destroy these star gods. They were able to, just after suffering horrendous losses, were able to turn the tide of the war. And they took these Catan and they blasted
Catan è vero, c'erano due miniature e basta, che tra l'altro non mi piacevano neanche chissà quanto.
Them into thousands of shards and entrap them in giant stasis vaults to now actually be slaves to the Necrons. And with the Necrons having the entirety of their old gods enslaved to them, they realized that soon their race was about to be attacked by the overcoming new races, the Eldari and the Krorks. So what they did is they retreated into giant stasis tombs in order to preserve their energy and their strength for when one day they would be reawakened and they would be able to rule the galaxy that was rightfully theirs. And then some dingus Adeptus Mechanicus guy diddled with a green console.
Sì, letteralmente il risveglio dei Necron, se ho ben capito da lore, è stato perché l'Adeptus Mechanicus ha combinato casino e li ha involontariamente risvegliati. E ne è successo uno, hanno cominciato a svegliarsi tutti i mondi tomba, se mi ricorro bene. Questa è stata l'introduzione dei Necron come esercito all'epoca. È stato colpa dell'Adeptus Mechanicus.
Necrons are back, super advanced, and they are here to reclaim the galaxy that they so rightfully.
Gli antichi sono stati uccisi tutti.
Now at tabletop, they're a lot like that. Tons of undead Egyptian skeleton robots.
Ecco.
When they die, they just
i modelli.
get right back up because they keep
Guarda che
on
bello
reanimating.
quello.
Hard to kill, tons of crazy stuff. You can use the Catan.
Guarda quest'altro, cioè incredibile, cioè sti modelli sono
pretty cool. The Necrons are one of the three major events in 40K. The Horus Heresy, the Fall of the Eldar, and the Awakening of the Necrons are all pretty substantial events. And the Necrons themselves are pretty dang cool as well.
Adesso quello più recente è la caduta di Cadia, probabilmente.
Lucky creatures, as long last you have found the tranquility of death. I was like you once, clinging to
Ho sentito che i Necron stanno cominciando a relazionarsi con gli altri. È successo durante la caduta di Cadia da lore, vero? Perfino loro si erano accorti di quello che stava per succedere e hanno cercato di aiutare Cadia, praticamente. Non tutti, alcuni sono fuggiti nella rete? No, mi sa che era un'altra cosa quella. Noele, ciao.
Trace in the Infinite especially, a little dickhead. But speaking of dickheads, Last Race.
Allora, scusate ragazzi, c'è una cosa di cui voglio parlare. Io, allora, un attimo, io adoro i Necron, però non mi piace assolutamente lo schema di colori. Il nero-verde o il metallico-verde non mi ha mai attirato, ma neanche un po'. Uno dei miei piccoli... Una delle cose che ho sempre voluto fare per collezionare un esercito di Necron è farlo in uno schema di colori che assomigli a quello dei Re dei Sepolcri di Khemri. Invece che metallici, tutti tipo di ceramica. Avete presente? Quindi di un colore praticamente osseo al posto del nero del metallico e sempre il glow del verde. Quello è lo schema di colori. Se mai collezionerò i Necron, li farò così, molto peculiari. E anzi, c'è un mondo tomba che ha proprio questo schema di colori, se ben mi ricordo, da lore. Sì. Diverse dinastie, quelle sono... Esatto, sì, sono diverse dinastie Necron. Sì. Ok, andiamo avanti, va. Siamo arrivati agli ultimi, che a molti non piacciono, ma a me sì.
But speaking of dickheads, Last Race, let's talk the Tau. The exact formation of the Tau Empire is not entirely understood. However, a long time ago, many thousands of years ago, in the 40K world that is, some Imperial navigation vessels were going around through different areas, and they saw a primitive race, blue people, smacking each other with sticks and stones. And they thought,
prima degli altri era loro a usare quella
Xenos
rete lì.
race who gives a shit. And they bailed. Then this
Quella parte
giant
non la so
warp
bene.
storm occurred right in that major area, unable to be breached. Then, once that warp storm 6,000 years later subsided, hello, those little sticks. Well, they decided to actually have no war of any kind and all just unite together under one flag of the Tau Empire. And now they have gigantic starships and Gundam robots and lasers and railguns and mechs, and they are here to ruin your day for the greater good. That is generally the Tau Empire. They have this kind of feeling of this homogenous group. All species can go underneath the banner.
Lo schema di base dei Tau, di questa sorta di color crema desertico, cioè mi fa veramente schifo. Bilantatore, ciao. Liquid, buonasera.
Prophets being the ethereals, who are actually kind of dicks and like to pull at strings a little bit, but then you have all these different races directly underneath them, and they all work together in this big group as this large, foreboding race that's
eccolo qua, lo schema di colori bianco e rosso è stupendo. Se mai avrò un esercito di Tau, lo farò così, maledizione.
Clearly pseudo-religious influence across the galaxy. The alien is not intrinsically evil. Do not hate him. Pity him, his ignorance. Seek to understand his differences and equate him with his inadequacies. Only then will he accept his place in the greater good. That is generally the Tau. And if you're kind of wondering like what their mainly big shtick is, well, they're all about big robots and mechs. They have laser rifles and rail guns. They got giant mechs with tons of missile pods and heavy rail rifles.
Che bello quel camminatore con i mega cannoni.
And burst cannons.
Cosa so, le broadside si chiamano. Bellissime.
And that is generally what the Tau is all about. But you're probably thinking, Bricky, this doesn't sound that evil. This doesn't sound very grim, dark Warhammer. And you'd be right. The Tau Empire really don't have that
l'impero degli asciugamani.
Like everybody else. They're
The
much
Towel
more
Empire.
Younger, new age thing. In fact, they're probably a lot less evil and a lot even better than they are now back in the day, because they liked having like that good guy faction. But a lot of us who really like the dark, depressing style of Warhammer didn't really like it that much. So, see, the Tau get a lot of hate, and a lot of that hate isn't necessarily unjustified. It's mainly from a tabletop perspective, but as you can see from all the visuals I've shown you recently, they don't really fit in the 40K universe very well. They lack that super...
Guardate, eccolo qua, lo schema di colori che mi piace per i Tau. Bellissimi. Guarda che belli. Rispetto a quelli color crema, santi Dio, veramente molto più belli. Un casino schierarli in battaglia con le cose. Guarda, avevo un amico che aveva un esercito di Tau perennemente con le armature spaccate, portandole in giro.
Fit in the 40K universe very well.
Grazie, grazie mille del follow, benvenuto.
Dark, dramatic, kind of high gothic level the Imperium has. They don't have the weird kind of like grungy stuff that Chaos or say the Orcs do. And the Necrons and the Eldar have their own specific style as well. The Tau really do look like something out of Gundam. And while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, it does definitely not fit too well. There's that.
Giocava 40.000 quello a tavolo, yes.
In tabletop,
Tau are
horrible at melee combat, but exceptionally good at range combat. So they blast everyone from really, really far away, and they have a million rules to make it so that it's nearly impossible for you to get into melee combat. So it basically just forces you to bottleneck the game into one specific gameplay style, which is gun to gun. And if you're doing gun to gun, they're going to win every time because they're the Tau. And the Tau are really damn good at shooting. So it's one of those things that make the Tau generally rather hated, and a lot of different reasons for that, both from style and such. But this is actually one of the things I wanted to end this video with, is that The Tau, while they have their issues,
Gli asciugamani,
you
Tau.
should not be discouraged from playing them. I'll make plenty of Tau weeaboo jokes, of course I will, but it's all generally in good fun. Anyone who legitimately doesn't want you to play a faction is an idiot and you shouldn't be giving them the time of day.
Esatto.
You pick what you think.
Bello il messaggio che condivido, io lo applico praticamente a ogni cosa possibile e immaginabile. Se c'è qualcuno che veramente ci tiene così tanto a insultarti perché stai facendo qualcosa che a lui non piace, è un imbecille, lascialo perdere. Se ti piace una fazione che, oh mio Dio, quella non va bene, quello, se vuoi ascoltare qualcosa, vuoi giocare a qualcosa, vuoi fare qualcosa, fai come cazzo ti pare. Questo è il bello. Bene. E c'è un qualcosa che mi attrae praticamente in ogni singola fazione.
Is cool and what you like. In Warhammer, especially now, factions get better and they get worse. They grow and then they fall. You should only be playing what you think is cool. You like the look, you like the models. If you're talking
Infatti,
tabletop,
questo è un consiglio che è sempre valido, non solo in Warhammer o qualunque cosa. Meglio fare qualcosa che ti piglia proprio bene a livello di estetica, a livello di funzionamento, a livello di proprio di spirito generale e diciamo come si pongono esteticamente le armate.
that is what you should be going for every time, is what you think is badass, because things change all the time. But the universe of Warhammer has so much going for it. Every faction has something interesting, every character has a story, and there's a million stories to be told. The universe is vast and exciting, and while it is dark, depressing, and horrible, that is the damn charm. And out of everything I've told you in these two videos, is anything that you could take away is the reason why so many of us are so into this series and why we like it so much. Because with so much variety, such an expansive universe, and so much that can be done, you can find yourself having a pretty great time. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it has been informative to you. If you'd like to see more of me, Bricky, we have twitch.tv/Bricky for my streams. You have
Seguitelo ragazzi lui, perché è veramente fighissimo quello che fa.
Merch, but underneath this, because I had to wear this so it wasn't black or white for the green screen, which is a little unfortunate, but it's fine. If you'd like to see merch, it is in the description. Also, if you'd like to support me on my Patreon page at patreon.com/Bricky for more videos like this, then that would also be wonderful. So Twitch, merch, Patreon, anything if you want to support, that would be fantastic. I'd appreciate it. If not, I'm just stoked you got all the way to the end of the video, and that is enough for me. So, we're going to be having some more content like this out in the future. Thank you so much for sticking around this long and being with me through this pretty rough time. That's, I think, all I got. Also, before I go, let me leave you with my favorite Warhammer quote. He who scoffs at the power of the las gun has never ran through a field of 1,000 of them. Bye-bye.
Questo è tipico di un giocatore della guardia. Esattamente. Oh, che bello. Beh, ragazzi, allora, questo è quello che vi avevo promesso, ovvero la seconda parte del video di Bricky con tutte quante le fazioni. Ce ne sono altri video di Bricky che voglio vedere insieme a voi, anche altri video a tema Warhammer 40.000 e non solo che voglio vedere insieme a voi. Ce n'è uno su tutti i capitoli di Space Marine, almeno quelli diciamo più o meno principali eccetera, che credo che sarà di interesse per molti, perché vuoi o non vuoi i Marine sono una delle parti assolutamente centrali, principali, insormontabili di Warhammer 40.000 e dopo tutto, come dire, abbiamo qua la dimostrazione del fatto che vuoi o non vuoi, se vuoi cominciare da qualcosa è una ottima idea cominciare esattamente dai Marine, per poi ovviamente spaziare in altre cose, ma ok. Va bene ragazzi, questo era il video su tutte quante le fazioni, non ho molto altro da dire perché tutto quello che vi ho detto ve l'ho detto durante il video eccetera, e poi non voglio farlo durare ancora di più di quanto non dura il video normalmente, perché è letteralmente un'ora di video. Va bene ragazzi, spero tanto che vi sia piaciuto, non vi preoccupate, vedremo altri video e la nostra immersione, o meglio nel mio caso la re-immersione in Warhammer 40.000 è solo agli inizi, quindi ci aspettano tante belle cose, ok?